Dear friends, welcome to this week's virtual Drasha. This week we had the incredible privilege to double Parashiyos of Behar Bechukosai and Emir Hashem Messiahim, complete Sefer Vayikra. And in Parashas Bechukosai, the Torah spends a significant amount of time speaking about the Tochacha, the series of curses which will befall Klal Yisrael in the event that we do not uphold our end of the covenantal relationship with the Ribono Shel Olam. But as important as the Tochacha is, and as important as it is to understand that there are consequences and ramifications for our lack of commitment to this covenantal relationship with the Kadosh Baruch Hu, with God, it's also important to recognize that there's a beautiful piece that comes before it. There's a series of brachos, a series of beautiful blessings. In Bechukosai Tilecho Mitzvasai Tishmach, Kadosh Baruch Hu says, if you are engaged in the relationship, if you do uphold your end of the covenantal bond with me, there is beautiful bracha, there's incredible blessing that is waiting for each of us as individuals and in Meretz Hashem as a nation as well. And in one of those psukim, HaKadosh Baruch Hu says, this is in Perek Chavav, Pasuk Yud, chapter 26, verse 10. V'achaltem yashan noshan, which literally means you'll eat the old produce. V'yashan mipnei chadash totziu. And then you'll have to move out the old produce in order to make way for the new produce. And again, the pasuk, of course, is highlighting or painting a picture of incredible abundance, overabundance. There'll be so much yield from the field. There'll be so much abundance that literally, Baruch Hashem, last year's crop will produce so much, you'll be sustained from it. And again, the old stuff, old is good. In other words, that you'll have so much produce from previous years that you'll be great. And not only that, but this year's crop will be so plentiful and you'll have no room to put everything. You'll have to clean out the produce from last year in order to make room for this year's produce. And Rashi HaKadosh says, Shiyu hagronos maleos chadash va'otzros maleos yashan. So what's going to happen? The threshing floor is going to be filled with new produce. The silos are going to be filled with old produce. Utzrichem atem lipanos ha'otzros lemakom acher laseis hachadash l'sochon. You're going to have to clean out the silos in order to be able to go ahead and make room for this year's crop, for this year's produce. And the Imre Emes, the Ger Rebbe asks such an incredible question. He says, I quote to you, he says, Afuche matarasa lamali. The Rebbe says, this is very nice, but what do I need this for? In other words, at a certain point, it almost seems like unnecessary abundance. In other words, if HaKadosh Baruch Hu is telling me, V'achaltem yashan noshan, okay, Baruch Hashem, there's going to be plenty, and the silos are going to be filled. Why do I need to reach this material state where now there's so much new produce that I have to go ahead and clean out the old produce from the silos in order to make room for the new? Why? In other words, there's enough. There's enough already. In other words, while it's beautiful to see this abundance, almost what the Imre Emes is saying is, doesn't it seem a bit over-excessive? Doesn't it seem a bit much? That again, the silos are so filled with the old stuff, the threshing floors are filled with the new produce. I have to clean out the silos, put the old produce somewhere else to be able to put the new produce in the silos. Why? If you've got enough from last year, you've got enough from previous years, if the silos are full, enough. Why the need for the additional appears to be overabundance of the chadash, of the new produce? And the Rebbe says something so incredibly beautiful. He says, Sheremez yeshkan le'inyan avodas Hashem hatzricha lihios misoch hischatshos. The Rebbe says there's an incredible metaphorical understanding over here. Yes, there's tremendous abundance, material abundance, but there's also a very important spiritual message over here, which is that sometimes you have to remove the old in order to make room for the new. Just like the silos are filled with last year's produce, previous year's produce, but the new stuff is here. Clean out the old and put in the new is an incredible metaphorical message for how we are to approach our spirituality as well. Now, dear friends, sometimes in life we develop patterns of behavior. And those patterns may not be bad. I'm not talking about negative patterns of behavior, which clearly have to be changed. But sometimes they're just patterns of behavior that we get used to. I do things a certain way. I live my life a certain way. And while it's not bad, it's not an avera, it's not rishos, it's not negative, but it also kind of gets me in a state of underperformance. Because sometimes the life practices of last year or last decade worked well for who I was back then. But now I need something new. Now I need something different. Now I need to adopt a different kind of approach in life. But I say to myself, hey, the silos are filled, right? As the famous adage goes, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. It's working. Sometimes in life systems, approaches, mindsets, hashkafas could be working, but it doesn't mean they're working well. We see this all the time in relationships. Sometimes you could have a marriage, you could have relationships with kids, and it's fine. It's fine, right? There's no fighting, there's no arguing, there's no screaming. It's fine. But this is exactly what it is. It's fine. And who wants to go through life just being fine when it could be great? How often does it happen that our marriages are fine, but with a little more effort, a little bit more work, a couple of changes and tweaks here and there, it could be great, it could be beautiful, it could be loving. And the Imre Emes says, it's the same yesod in our relationship with HaKadosh Baruch Hu. You know, sometimes if you look in the spiritual mirror, I daven a certain way, I learn a certain way, my Shabbos is a certain way, right? My life is everything, all the spiritual, and they're fine. They're absolutely fine. Because this is the way I've been doing things for such an extended period of time. But the Rebbe says sometimes it's out with the old, in with the new, even though the old is good. It's not that, so many times we talk about, again, the need to affect profound cathartic change in my life because things are broken. Sometimes things are not broken. They're just okay. But why go through life just being okay? Why not strive for greatness? Why not strive for beauty? Why not strive for passion? It says the Imre, that's the pshat. V'achaltem yashan noshan. Sometimes I'll go through my spiritual life, and again, Baruch Hashem, my spiritual silo is filled with so many beautiful and wonderful things. The same way that I've been living my life, the same constructs, the same approaches, the same mindsets, the same hashkafas. But then every once in a while, you have to take personal inventory. Every once in a while, you have to look into the personalistic silo of spirituality and say, hey, what do I got here? What do I got here? Like, what have I amassed? And sometimes I come to this epiphanical moment, this epiphany, when I recognize the yashan mipnei chadash totziu. There's a better way to do things. There's a better way to live. There's a better way to approach my relationship with HaKadosh Baruch Hu. There's a better way to approach my marriage. There's a better way to approach my kids. There's a better way. And in that moment, but you say to yourself, but the silo's full and it's good. It's good. Baruch Hashem, nothing's broken. You're right. The silo, the personal silo is filled with things that are not broken. They're fine. But just because they're fine doesn't mean it can't be better. The yashan mipnei chadash totziu. Sometimes you have to look at the silo that's filled with old things that are good, that are fine, and then find the courage to out with the old, remove those old things, and replace it with something even better. Imagine for a moment if we engaged in this personalistic inventory. Right? If we looked at our lives and just the different parts of our lives, and not every part at once, because that's probably a bit too daunting and overwhelming. But imagine we identified 1, 2, 3 areas in life where, you know what, I want to look at really how I'm doing it. And again, this is in our spiritual lives, this is in our relationship lives, it could even be in our career lives. How am I doing it? And I think what we recognize is that for many of us, we just fall into patterns of behavior. And those patterns become reinforced over years and years and years of consistent repetition. And it's fine. And it's fine. But what about looking at life? Not through the lens of what's broken and needs to be repaired, but through the lens of what's fine, what's yashan, but maybe could be made better. What's old and maybe could be replaced with a better system that's new. You know, sometimes, you know, in life, you can learn a lot from everything, like including appliances. You know, you could have an appliance, your refrigerator in your home that is many years old, and it's working fine. It's working fine. But you know, at a certain point in time, it's no longer going to work. You're going to have to replace it with something else. So I could wait till it breaks and then replace it, or I could be a bit more proactive. And even though the refrigerator is working just fine, how can I make it a little bit better? How can I make my life a little bit better? The yashan mipnei chadash totziu. Sometimes look at the old and replace with something new. This is the bracha that the Ribono Shel Olam is giving us. Yes, it's a material blessing that you'll have such an overabundance of material wealth, of material goods, of produce, that you'll have to clear out the silos from the old, replace it with the new. But more than HaKadosh Baruch Hu is giving us the actual personal bracha, the ability to examine our lives, to engage in introspective activity, to look at the personalistic silo of my identity and look at all of the systems that are part of my life. And to ask myself, where could I be better? How can I do things better? What are the systems that are old, that are still working, but maybe could be replaced by something a little bit more beautiful? You can go through life being fine. You could go through life being okay. Or you could strive for beauty, strive for greatness, strive for it to be something special, instead of it being just ordinary. And all of it comes down to one phrase, V'yashan mipnei chadash totziu. If we could find the courage to identify the things that are old but working fine, and then devise a plan, system, and approaches for a new approach that makes it even better, that's a life that HaKadosh Baruch Hu looks at and says, beautiful, wonderful, fantastic. We should be gebenched in Yirtzeh Hashem, that our material silos should overflow, and we should be benched to have the courage to look at our personalistic silos, figure out what's old and fine, and replace it with something new and beautiful. Wishing everyone a good Erev Shabbos and a beautiful Shabbos Kodesh.